The sound of sledgehammer against metal echoed through the silent night in Cedar Springs, Colorado, as Eric Morgan watched helplessly through his home security cameras as his dream was systematically destroyed. On his cell phone screen, the plump figure of Karen Peterson, chair of the local Resource Conservation Committee, was turning $15.00 into twisted scrap metal under the silvery glow of the moon. Eric, a 45-year-old agronomist who had put in 2 decades of work to raise that money, felt his stomach turn. The revolutionary irrigation system he had installed just a week ago, the result of years of research and saving, was being reduced to rubble by a woman who called herself Guardian of the Common Good. 911. What's your emergency? The attendant's voice sounded distant as Eric watched, paralyzed, as Karen threw pieces of destroyed equipment across the property. I'm witnessing an act of vandalism in real time on my property. 1247 Pinecrest Road, Cedar Springs. The trespasser is destroying my irrigation system with a sledgehammer. Eric's property, a 5-acre tract on the outskirts of Cedar Springs, represented everything he had achieved since moving from Michigan 15 years ago. The modest, 2-story house, painted in earthy tones, contrasted with the ostentatious mansions that were beginning to populate the area, including Karen Peterson's 3-story residence, located just 2 properties to the north. When the first police cars arrived, their blue and red lights dancing against the walls of the house, Karen was sitting calmly on the steps of Eric's porch, the abandoned sledgehammer at her side, as if waiting to be congratulated on a job well done. Officer Robert Martinez, a veteran of the local police force, was the first to approach the scene. Ms. Peterson, can you explain what happened here? Of course I can, officer. Karen straightened her perfectly aligned gray bob cut, her tone of voice brimming with moral certainty. As chair of the Resource Conservation Committee, it's my responsibility to protect the interests of the community. This system was stealing water from the common water table. Eric, who had just left the house, had to be restrained by the second officer present. Stealing water. I have all the technical reports proving that the system reduces consumption by 60%. You've destroyed a technology that could benefit the whole community. The conflict between Eric and Karen hadn't started that night. Ever since he had presented his sustainable irrigation project during a homeowners association meeting 3 months earlier, Karen had started a systematic campaign against the installation. First came the emails with unfounded environmental concerns, then the attempts to block the necessary permits, and now this, criminal destruction of the property. Ms. Peterson, you are under arrest for trespassing and criminal vandalism, Officer Martinez announced, pulling out his handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. That's absurd, Karen protested as she was handcuffed. I'm a respected community leader. You can't treat me like this. Over the next few hours, while the police collected evidence and testimonies, Eric walked among the wreckage of his irrigation system, documenting each destroyed piece with his cell phone. The investment represented not just money, but years of research into sustainable agriculture and the dream of turning his property into a model of resource conservation. Lauren Martinez, a lawyer specializing in civil law and the wife of Officer Robert, showed up the next morning at the makeshift office Eric kept in his garage. Mr. Morgan, I heard about the incident last night. I believe we have a solid case against Mrs. Peterson. Eric looked up from the damage reports he was compiling. She destroyed more than equipment, Dr. Martinez. She destroyed years of work and research. That's exactly why I'm here, Lauren replied, placing her briefcase on the table. What happened goes beyond simple vandalism. We have evidence of systematic harassment, attempts at defamation, and now criminal destruction of property. We can not only seek compensation for material damage, but also punitive damages. As they discussed legal strategies, Eric's phone kept ringing with calls from other members of the community, some offering support, others, Karen's allies, veiledly threatening consequences if he went ahead with the lawsuit. The news spread quickly through the small community of Cedar Springs. The Cedar Springs Gazette ran a front-page story about the incident, highlighting not only the destruction of the irrigation system, but also exposing Karen's history of controlling behavior as chair of the Conservation Committee. "This isn't just about me or my system," Eric explained to Lauren as they reviewed the case documentation. "It's about setting a precedent. How many other people have had their lives affected by people like Karen, who think they can impose their will on other people's property?" Lauren nodded, understanding the larger dimension of the case. "What happened to you could be the catalyst for a much-needed change in the way these homeowners associations and local committees operate. But I need you to understand, this could become a long and grueling battle." Eric looked out of his garage window, observing the twisted remains of his irrigation system still strewn across the field. The light of the rising sun cast elongated shadows on the wreckage, like a physical reminder of the clash between innovation and misdirected conservatism. "I'm prepared," he replied, his voice firm. "Some battles need to be fought, no matter the cost." News of Karen Peterson's arrest quickly went viral on local Cedar Springs social media. Eric woke up the next morning to dozens of notifications on his cell phone, half of them messages of support, the other half veiled threats from other members of the Resource Conservation Committee. "You don't understand how things work around here," one of the anonymous messages read. "Karen was just doing her job. You'll learn the hard way." Lauren Martinez arrived at Eric's makeshift office with a stack of documents and a determined expression. "The good news? We have solid evidence. The bad news? Karen has hired Richard Hawthorne." Eric felt his stomach sink. Hawthorne was known throughout Colorado as the Rottweiler of HOAs, a lawyer who specialized in defending homeowners associations and local committees, no matter how questionable their actions. "He's already trying to characterize Karen as a concerned citizen who acted under extreme stress," Lauren explained, spreading documents out on the table. "But we have something he didn't expect." Lauren slid a flash drive across the table. "I got access to the committee's internal emails. Karen wasn't acting alone. There is a systematic pattern of harassment against landowners trying to implement sustainable technologies in the region. The revelations in the emails were disturbing. In the last 5 years, at least 7 other landowners had given up on sustainable projects after facing organized resistance from the committee. Solar panels mysteriously vandalized, water catchment systems sabotaged, community gardens destroyed, always following the same pattern of intimidation. "This is bigger than we imagined," Eric muttered, looking through the documents. "Why so much resistance to sustainability?" "Follow the money," Lauren replied, pulling out another document. "The committee receives significant donations from traditional energy companies and large farmers in the region. Projects like yours threaten the status quo." At the police station, Karen was facing her own moment of truth. Officer Martinez conducted the interrogation with a calm that only added to her discomfort. "Ms. Peterson, do you maintain regular correspondence with Western Resources Corporation?" Martinez slid an envelope across the table. That's private," Karen stammered, her normally controlled face betraying signs of panic. "Not when it's part of a criminal investigation," Martinez replied. "Especially considering that Western Resources donated $50, $0 to your committee on the same day that Mr. Morgan received final approval for his irrigation system." Meanwhile, Eric had an unexpected visitor on his property. Marcus Chen, an agronomist from the University of Colorado, showed up unannounced. "I read about your system in the newspaper," Marcus explained, looking at the debris still strewn across the field. "The design is revolutionary. Have you considered patenting it?" Eric laughed humorlessly. "It's hard to patent something that's in pieces." "Maybe not," Marcus replied, pulling a camera out of his backpack. "With your permission, I'd like to document what's left. I can testify as an expert on the potential of the system and the damage caused." Marcus's arrival provoked a chain reaction in the community. Other homeowners, who had remained silent for fear of retaliation, began to speak out. Jennifer Rodriguez, a biologist who had her vertical garden project blocked by the committee, organized a meeting at her home. "We can't let them keep intimidating us," Jennifer declared to the packed room. "What happened to Eric is just the tip of the iceberg." Lauren, who was also present at the meeting, saw an opportunity. What if we turned Eric's individual case into a class action? With all of you as co-plaintiffs, we can expose the systematic pattern of abuse of power. News of the possible class action quickly reached Richard Hawthorne's ears. The lawyer showed up at Lauren's office the next morning, his impeccable Italian suit contrasting with his sour expression. "Let's be reasonable," Hawthorne proposed, adjusting his silk tie. "My client is willing to pay for the property damage and make a public apology. There's no need to turn this into a media circus." Lauren smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's interesting how you always want to be reasonable after you've been caught. But this time it's not just about money. It's about systematic change." That evening, Eric sat on his balcony, watching the sun set over the wreckage of his system. Marcus had spent all day documenting each component, explaining how the design could be rebuilt and even improved. "You know what's ironic?" Eric commented to Lauren, who had stopped to update him on developments in the case. "Karen destroyed the system because she thought she was protecting water resources, but every day we go without it means 60% more water wasted. Sometimes the people who shout the loudest about protecting something are the ones who damage it the most," Lauren replied, making notes on her tablet. "But we're about to change that. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for Monday." Eric took one last look at the damaged field before heading inside. Tomorrow would be another day of battle, but for the first time since the incident, he felt he wasn't fighting alone. The destruction of his system had inadvertently created something new, a community of resistance, united by the desire for change and justice. In her cell, Karen Peterson stared at the wall, her moral certainty beginning to crack under the weight of the evidence piling up against her. The empire she had built was crumbling, and she was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, she had been on the wrong side of history all along. The Cedar Springs County Courthouse was packed on the morning of the preliminary hearing. Eric adjusted his tie, sitting next to Lauren Martinez, as he watched Karen Peterson walk in, escorted, her usual air of superiority replaced by a tense expression. Richard Hawthorne, impeccable in his Italian suit, whispered something in her ear. "All rise," announced the officer as Judge Diana Blackburn entered the room. The magistrate, known for her firm stance against abuses of power, scanned the room over her reading glasses. "Case number 2023 CV 4587, Morgan versus Peterson and the Cedar Springs Resource Conservation Committee," she announced. "I see we have a motion to turn this into a class action." Lauren stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. Since the initial incident, we have identified 17 other property owners who have suffered systematic harassment and property damage under Ms. Peterson's administration." Richard Hawthorne practically jumped out of his chair. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a clear attempt to turn a simple property damage case into a media circus." "Simple case." Jennifer Rodriguez couldn't contain her indignation from the gallery. "They destroyed my vertical garden and threatened my family." "Order!" Judge Blackburn banged her gavel. "Mr. Hawthorne, your client is being charged with felony vandalism, trespassing, and now apparently leading a systematic intimidation scheme. I'd say that's far from simple." Marcus Chen, the agronomist, was called as the first witness. With scientific precision, he detailed the workings of the destroyed irrigation system, projecting photos and diagrams onto the screen in the room. "This system," he explained, pointing to a graph, "not only reduced water consumption by 60%, but also increased soil absorption efficiency by 45%. In practical terms, that means that every acre irrigated by this method would save approximately 500,000 gallons of water per year." Lauren seized the moment. "And what would the impact be if this system were adopted by other properties in the region?" "Based on our calculations," Marcus replied, adjusting his glasses, "if just 20% of the farms in Cedar Springs adopted this technology, the annual water savings would be enough to supply a small town for an entire year." Karen visibly stirred in her chair, as Lauren projected the committee's emails onto the screen. The messages revealed a web of connections between the committee and large corporations interested in maintaining the status quo. "Ms. Peterson," Lauren began her questioning, "can you explain why the committee received a $50 donation from Western Resources Corporation on the same day it tried to block approval of Mr. Morgan's system?" That's a coincidence," Karen stammered, her face turning red. "The donations are for community projects." "Community projects?" Lauren picked up another document. "Like the campaign to block the installation of solar panels on the Rodriguez property? Or the destruction of the Henderson's water collection system?" The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of indignation. In the gallery, more residents recognized themselves as victims of the same pattern of harassment and intimidation. Richard Hawthorne tried one last card. "Your Honor, my client acted under extreme pressure, genuinely believing she was protecting the interests of the community. We are prepared to offer a generous settlement to compensate for the material damage." "Generous?" Eric finally said, his voice heavy with emotion. "What about the years of research? What about the other residents who gave up their dreams because of her actions? Some things are priceless, Mr. Hawthorne." Judge Blackburn removed her glasses, massaging the bridge of her nose. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm not only accepting the motion to turn this into a class action, but I'm also referring the case for criminal investigation by the District Attorney's Office. The connections between the committee and the corporations suggest possible conspiracy and corruption." Karen Peterson collapsed in her chair, while Richard Hawthorne furiously scribbled notes on his pad. In the gallery, Jennifer Rodriguez hugged other residents, tears of relief streaming down her face. After the session, Eric met Marcus in the court corridor. "Thank you for your testimony," he said, holding out his hand. "Don't thank me yet," Marcus replied with a smile. "I have a proposal for you. The university is interested in funding the reconstruction of your system, in partnership with a research program in sustainable agriculture. What do you think?" Before Eric could answer, Lauren approached with urgent news. "The district attorney's office just issued search and seizure warrants for the offices of the committee and Western Resources. This goes way beyond Cedar Springs." Eric watched as Karen was escorted out of the courthouse, her once imposing posture now bowed under the weight of her actions. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since the destruction of his system, he saw a clear path ahead, not just to justice, but to real change. "You know," he said to Lauren and Marcus, "maybe Karen did us all a favor without meaning to. Sometimes you have to destroy something for people to realize its true value." The late afternoon light streamed in through the tall windows of the courthouse, casting long shadows down the marble corridor. In Cedar Springs, a new story was beginning to be written. A story not just about sustainable irrigation, but about the power of community against the tyranny of the status quo. News of the Attorney General's investigation against the Resource Conservation Committee and Western Resources Corporation exploded like a bomb in Cedar Springs. The Cedar Springs Gazette published a special series detailing the web of corruption, titled "The Hidden Face of Power: How an HOA Stifled Sustainable Innovation." Eric woke up to a call from Marcus Chen at 6 a.m. "Turn on the TV to Channel 9. You need to see this." On the screen, FBI agents were removing boxes of documents from Western Resources headquarters. The reporter, positioned in front of the corporate building, reported, "Sources indicate that the investigation has expanded to 5 states, revealing a possible national scheme to suppress renewable energy and water conservation initiatives." "This is bigger than we imagined," Marcus commented over the phone. "The university wants to accelerate our partnership. The dean is preparing a press conference to announce a research center in sustainable technologies with your irrigation system as a pilot project." Lauren Martinez showed up at Eric's property an hour later, carrying a stack of newspapers and her inseparable tablet. "The documents seized are pure dynamite," she explained, spreading papers out on the kitchen table. "Western Resources had an entire manual on how to manipulate HOAs to block sustainable projects." "What about Karen?" Eric asked, pouring coffee for them both. She's starting to talk, Lauren replied, a satisfied smile on her face. Apparently, being dumped by Richard Hawthorne was the push she needed. She's cooperating with the prosecutors in exchange for a more favorable deal. Eric's phone rang again. Jennifer Rodriguez, now leader of the newly formed Landlords Collective for Sustainability. Eric, you're not going to believe this. We've just received 15 new membership applications. Landlords from all over the region want to implement systems like yours. The morning turned into a frantic sequence of meetings. In the makeshift office in the garage, Eric received a delegation of local farmers interested in sustainable technology. Marcus presented projections and feasibility studies, while Lauren advised on legal issues. What stopped us before was fear, explained Harold Freeman, a third-generation farmer. Fear of retaliation, fear of being isolated in the community. But you've changed that. In court, Judge Blackburn was presiding over a special hearing on the class action. Karen Peterson, now without her usual air of superiority, gave detailed testimony about years of manipulation and intimidation. It was a well-organized system, she admitted, her voice shaking. Western Resources would give us suggestions on which projects to block. In return, we received substantial donations and political support. Richard Hawthorne, sitting at the back of the room, seemed to have aged a decade in a week. His corporate clients were abandoning ship in droves, and his reputation as the Rottweiler of HOAs was in ruins. Back at Eric's estate, a team from the university was beginning fieldwork for the new research center. Marcus was overseeing the installation of advanced sensors that would monitor every aspect of the rebuilt irrigation system. We're going to turn your property into a living laboratory, Marcus explained, showing the plans on his tablet. Every piece of data collected here will help refine and improve the system for future implementations. Lauren arrived later in the afternoon with more news. The public prosecutor's office is expanding the investigation to other corporations. Apparently, Western Resources wasn't the only company using HOAs as a task force against sustainability. Eric watched the movement on his property. Researchers installing equipment, farmers discussing possibilities, reporters documenting each development. It was surreal to think that it had all started with an act of destruction. You know what's ironic? He commented to Lauren as they watched the sunset from the balcony. Karen wanted to stop the change, but ended up being the catalyst for it. Sometimes we need a villain to create heroes, Lauren replied, reviewing documents on her tablet. And speaking of heroes, get ready for more attention. The story is gaining national traction. 3 major news networks want interviews. Jennifer showed up for the collective's evening meeting, which now took place regularly in Eric's living room. We've just received support from an environmental foundation, she announced. They want to finance sustainable irrigation systems for small farmers in the region. The evening progressed, and Eric found a moment of quiet in his field. The wreckage of the original system had been completely removed, replaced by new, more advanced equipment. Where once there had been destruction, hope now sprang up. Marcus joined him, carrying a detailed blueprint of the new system. Come to think of it, he said, we should thank Karen. Without her, your system might only have benefited your property. Now, it's going to help transform an entire region. Eric smiled, watching the stars that were beginning to dot the Cedar Springs sky. The battle wasn't completely won. There was still resistance. There were still challenges ahead. But something fundamental had changed. Fear had been replaced by determination. Isolation by solidarity. Tomorrow we start testing the new system, Marcus commented, putting the plants away. Are you ready to make history? More than ready, Eric replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun had set. I'm ready to make a difference. The meeting room of the Sustainable Technologies Research Center was packed that autumn morning. 6 months had passed since the destruction of Eric's original irrigation system, and Cedar Springs had become an unexpected epicenter of agricultural innovation. The results for the first half of the year exceeded all expectations, Marcus Chen presented, projecting impressive graphs on the screen. Not only has the new system maintained the 60% saving in water consumption, but with the improvements implemented, we've managed to increase crop yields by 35%. Eric, sitting among local farmers and university researchers, was still amazed at the magnitude of the changes. His property, once a simple experimental field, was now serving as a model for a national sustainable agriculture program. Lauren Martinez, who had become more than a lawyer, a true partner in Cedar Springs' green revolution, raised her hand. What about the legal aspect, the changes in regulations for HOAs? Excellent question, replied the governor of Colorado, who had made a point of attending the meeting in person. Bill 2024-117, inspired by the Morgan case, was passed last week. Now, no HOA can block the implementation of proven sustainable technologies. Jennifer Rodriguez, current president of the Homeowners Collective for Sustainability, which replaced the former Conservation Committee, shared her own numbers. We have 47 properties implementing systems based on Eric's model, and 120 more on the waiting list. Change is happening faster than we could have imagined. Outside the room, through the large windows of the research center, you could see the green fields of Eric's property, now dotted with monitoring equipment and control stations. Agronomy students from all over the country came to do internships there, learning not only about sustainable irrigation, but about how to tackle resistance to change. I received an interesting letter yesterday, Eric commented during a coffee break. Karen Peterson wrote from prison. Lauren raised her eyebrows, interested. And what did she have to say? She apologized, Eric replied, pulling a folded envelope out of his pocket. But more than that, she offered information about other corporations that are still trying to stifle sustainable initiatives in other states. The investigation that began in Cedar Springs had turned into one of the largest anti-corruption operations in the country. Western Resources Corporation was just the tip of the iceberg. A complex web of companies using HOAs as instruments of control was being exposed and dismantled. You know what's most ironic? Marcus commented, adjusting his glasses. The very corporations that tried to destroy us are now investing in green technology. Western Resources announced the creation of a renewable energy division yesterday. The day continued with technical presentations and future plans. Eric watched everything with a mixture of pride and humility. His original irrigation system, born out of years of solitary research, had evolved into something much bigger than himself. We need to talk about expansion. The university rector approached Eric over lunch. We have requests for partnerships coming in from universities from California to Florida. Your system is no longer just a local project. It's a movement. In the afternoon, a live broadcast connected the meeting with farmers from 5 different states. Each shared their experiences implementing variations of Eric's system, adapted to local conditions. The challenges were different, but the spirit of innovation and resistance was the same. It's like a wave spreading, Jennifer observed, watching the reports. Each property that adopts the system becomes a new center of change. Lauren, who was still legally representing several property owners in similar battles around the country, shared a legal perspective. The Cedar Springs case set a precedent. Now, when an HOA tries to block sustainable technology, they face not only local resistance, but federal scrutiny. At the end of the day, as the sun set over the irrigated fields, Eric walked with Marcus to the spot where, 6 months earlier, the wreckage of his original system lay. Now, modern sensors and efficient pipes dotted the landscape like symbols of progress. Do you know what impresses me the most? Marcus reflected. It's not just the technology, it's how an entire community has been transformed. Cedar Springs used to be known as a bastion of environmental conservatism. Now it's a model of sustainable innovation. Eric smiled, remembering the night he watched helplessly as Karen destroyed his work. Sometimes you have to lose something to gain so much more. The research center, built where once there was just an empty field, shone in the last lights of the day. Inside, researchers were still at work, analyzing data, refining processes, preparing the next generation of innovators. What's next? Lauren asked, joining them in the field. Now, Eric replied, watching a group of students conducting tests on the system. Now we continue planting seeds of change, not just in the soil, but in people's minds. A gentle wind blew across the field, making the plants dance softly. Somewhere, Karen Peterson was contemplating the consequences of her actions in a prison cell. But her act of destruction had, ironically, built something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Cedar Springs had been transformed. It was no longer just a town on the map. It was a symbol of how resistance to change could, paradoxically, catalyze the very change it was trying to prevent. And as the sun set over the horizon, Eric knew that this was not an ending, but only the beginning of something much bigger.